Hey guys, it's Amy here, back again with another video. Here's something fun. Today is my main character's birthday. She'd be 23 years old if she existed in this parallel universe. I've thrown her name around in a few videos related to my book, Aster's Coda Exposure. In about a year from now, the book will be published. Hopefully. You already know right now how much life can screw us over, right? So, in honor of my lead, Abby Tacker, turning 23, it was only fitting to make a video of 23 facts about my book baby that hasn't quite been born yet. I don't know, when is a book born? We only call them book babies because we love them and we treat them like children. We put our blood, sweat, and tears into making them, but in no way does the process of actually writing a book compare to birth. Anyway, here are 23 facts about Aster's Coda exposed, hopefully without any spoilers in them. This story takes place in New Zealand. This is a bit of an obvious one as I live in New Zealand myself. This decision was also down to a theme in my book about familiarity versus the unknown. So, of course, I wasn't going to be writing about teens in America when I know nothing about the American schooling system. I just stuck with what I knew. Well, not quite. This novel does not take place where I live, but it does take place somewhere that I have been. My main characters live in Rotorua, also known in New Zealand as Rotovegas. I decided to use that place because many times I visited there, the nature especially felt like it was straight out of a fantasy world or some other kind of world. It is very culturally rich location, it is the geothermal hotspot of New Zealand, and it ended up tying a lot of the points in my novel together really well. I could not settle on a surname for my main character. I could not find a last name to suit Abby for years. I can't believe I settled on the first name Abby so quick. I mean, I'm not even really fond of Abby as a name. But God, the number of last names that I gave her. There was Tonks, which I stole off Harry Potter. Then there was Trevino, and then there was Hammond, and I eventually settled on Tacker. And I think there was Ryder in between as well, or some other last name starting with R. Well, whatever. There isn't even a significance to the last name in her story. I just really couldn't find one that suited the name well. I don't know why I got so fussed over it, in all honesty. I published a version of this story on Wattpad. You heard me right, I was a Wattpad author. In no way is a successful one though. My rating at the time was terrible. I don't want to see it. It makes me cringe just thinking about the fact of how bad I was at writing. The version that I'm going to be publishing is way different from the original, as you'll soon find out in some of these remaining facts. I mean, considering how bad my book was, I think I did alright. 2,000 reads from a preteen writing a book that had barely a narrative and shells of characters. But I wasn't happy with it. So I took it down and I started to rewrite it. And here I am, on the road to publishing it. Abby's half-brother was originally based off of Joe Sugg. He's a YouTube star from England. He made it to the finals of Strictly Come Dancing 2018. Now he dates one of the dancers from Strictly Come Dancing. Well, I did have a tiny crush on him when I was 13 and I started writing this story. So I based a character off of him. Abby's half-brother, Rocco Hammond Tacker. In my head now he still looks roughly the same, but his voice claim has changed. And of course his personality has as well. For some reason now I imagine his voice as Gavin Ree from Achievement Hunter, even though Rocco is not British in the slightest. I guess I can't hear him scream in any other way than the way that Gavin screams. I wrote the settings used in this novel to break cliches. The one thing I hated about fantasy since I was a kid was the lack of variation in the environments. It was always the same European forest settings, with the same European style of buildings. I initially wrote my novel exclusively as taking part in a small suburb, but during my rewrite I decided something else. I wanted to include more. So I decided that every otherworldly location that appeared in my novel would be of a different kind of climate and environment and architectural style. Every place my characters would go or my characters would come from would be distinctly different from each other. To me, this gives a richer sense of culture in this world, and it just makes me way more engaged as a writer. I hope readers will feel the same way when they read it. My main character used to have a dog. This was in my Wattpad version, but for the rewrite I decided it was against my characters. Not that they hated animals, more that they didn't have the time to look after a puppy. Well, this dog was a black Labrador, and it was named Pepsi. You heard that right, it was named after a fizzy drink. I was gonna have this whole plot point where he started talking like some kind of magical kids fantasy companion. But I didn't know what to do after that, so rest in peace, Pepsi. I came up with this concept while my dad was watching Iron Man. At least that's what I think happened. This was when I first on Wattpad, like not even a month in. I remember watching some scenes in Iron Man. I remember thinking to myself that there's not a lot of female superheroes out there who do the same kind of things that Iron Man and Batman and superheroes like that did. So I created Abby with the original concept of her being a female superhero. So yeah, it was initially going to be that kind of book. Like I said, it has evolved like crazy. Music has been very influential for me while writing this book. I have made a playlist on Spotify for every single book in this series that I'm going to be writing. And I have planned to extend the number of songs on these as I write my books. It kind of made sense to me as a dancer. Every time I hear a song, I either imagine it done to a dance or to a music video that I make up kind of on the spot. And eventually I ended up pairing songs to certain scenes in the books as I was outlining them. The most notable artists are 21 Pilots, Aviva, Coven, Lindsay Sterling, and 8 Graves. Just listening to these songs as I write really helps me to get into the scene. I get so many feels listening to those songs now. It's just improving my experience of listening to them. My main character was going to be an android. Boy, do I see how flawed that is now. And how much I made her a knockoff Iron Man. My initial plan was that she was a girl in high school who had a microchip that ended up making her transform into an android magically somehow. And while I was writing it, I treated an android as a species. God, the flaws. So yeah, Abby is not an android anymore. She does not have guns popping out of her hands, a weakness to salt water, and she does not vomit petrol. Thank you very much. Psychology has been a major influence of my series. I don't study it in a degree per se, but I just love studying it in my own time. Ever since my teens, I always had an interest in how people develop and change and behave. This explains why I like character-driven stories so much, but it goes beyond that in my Aster's Coda series. Each book in my series focuses on a different psychological theme. And the way that my magic system works and develops depends on human behavior and psychology as well. I've drawn my book characters time and time again. I think this is what made me want to draw people so much. Whenever I was bored, I would just try and draw my characters. I would improve myself by looking at references, looking at my grandma's art books, and just generally getting practice out of it. But more often than not, if I'm drawing a human or a humanoid, it was always my book characters. Abby especially. So whenever I now have a story idea or a plot point brewing in my head, I like to draw it to flesh it out a little bit more. Kind of make a bit of a concept around them as I draw them. And Abby seemed to be either the most familiar one for me or the one who constantly changed the most for me. 3 characters have been ghosted and 5 new characters have been added in the process of my drafting. These are just the characters I can remember off the top of my head from when I did my Wattpad write. It's been a while since I've been to that version of it, and there's no way I want to go back to it again. My story has changed so much that I can't remember all of the characters in it. But I knew the characters that weren't there. I guess as I was rewriting it, I just really worked out what characters needed to be there, what characters didn't need to be there, and what their roles were. For instance, I have this one character named Fauna. She was originally going to be a very big role in my book, but I ended up dialing back her role a lot more now, as I realized that the kind of stuff that she could do, the kind of stuff she had to be, had to do, whatever works for the story, right? My initial writing was very reminiscent of Riordan's. He was my favorite author for a good few years, up until I was like 15, I think. His hilarity and quirkiness was what really won me over in a lot of his writing. So I tried to implement that in my own work. Emphasis on tried. I was very bad at humor. I cringe over the fact that I forcefully tried. It is very different to the humor that I write now, especially as humor comes a little bit more naturally and subconsciously for me, rather than having those really forceful, really cringy moments. Each of my 4 main characters represents a season. I know there's a ton of different 4-group dynamics, but I think this one suits my 4 main characters the most. I don't even know if I wrote them that way on purpose or anything, but somehow it works. Rocco is summer, Abby is fall, Jeff is winter, and Jada is spring. When I found out how I made that dynamic subconsciously, I thought I was a genius. But I feel like people have done it before. The ideologies of my worlds are reminiscent of the kind of magic that they use. I don't think this is a spoiler considering my blurb starts with "this world isn't alone." Each of the worlds in my stories has a set kind of magic to it. And that magic type affects people. The way they see themselves and their magic and other people who don't use the same magic as them. It becomes a huge driving point as I continue my series all the way into the 5th book. Once again, I just love exploring what makes people tick. One of my characters used to be a shapeshifter. Basically, I made a knockoff Hulk. The one character I had, whenever he was angry, he would gradually transform into a tiger. 'Cause that's fun, right? I didn't even notice it was a knockoff Hulk at the time, I just wrote it. I didn't even think about writing him where his anger got him into trouble. I mean, that would have been a good plot point, huh? This book wasn't initially going to be published. When I published this initial version of the book on Wattpad, I didn't write it with the expectation to gain any kind of Wattpad fame. I just put it on there to see if anyone would actually like my books. I never considered writing to be a path for me, whether it was full-time or something on the side. It wasn't until I watched some AuthorTube videos that I decided that this could be possible for me. If I just knew how, stuck at it, and made it to the best quality possible. Even you could publish a book. Abby is a history buff. This is very appropriate. Abby grew up being told about her family history. They were her bedtime stories. Tales of warriors in her family's lineage that date as far back as the 18th century. That's what influenced her to have a general interest in history, mainly wars and how people would be affected by them. I actually implemented this element of her personality as I was studying history myself. I only studied it for a year though, my final year of high school. From the moment the book was conceptualized, I wanted to have a diverse cast. This was absolutely influenced by my upbringing. I grew up in a very accepting community where all walks of life were accepted. As I said before, the main catalyst for writing my novel was to see a female in a heroic position. But I didn't stop there. I include various ethnicities, genders, financial situations, and later in the books I'm going to be including sexualities. I'm just not including them right now because that's not really at the forefront of my book right now. I had my most powerful writing moment when I was writing this book. This was when I was writing a fight scene in a very belly of the whale kind of moment for my main characters. I was so invested in this fight, I wrote the entire chapter it was in one night without taking any breaks. I distinctly remember when I finished the chapter, I lifted my hands off the keyboard and they were shaking. That was the moment when I realized how powerful this piece of writing was. This was what I wanted to do. This was my right story. And it was another creative passion that I found that I would take to the grave. I've created 5 new fantasy races for this book alone. This is like my favorite part of world building. New humanoid races and creatures give me life, especially when I get to give them powers and abilities. Like, each of them is so uniquely different. We've got Terrarians, telekinetics, dematoxins, and wait, that's a spoiler for you guys. I'm getting way too excited. I'm gonna fill all of my worlds with these races and even more, and it will be absolutely glorious. My fight scenes are loosely inspired by the fight scenes shown in RWBY. This is one of the things that the anime RWBY is famed for. While not all of my weapons are also guns in this universe, I can confirm that their choreography and the pairing of fights to music has heavily been inspired by this series. Because fights are just improvised dances with a little bit of bloodshed, huh? Well, that's how I see them in my eyes. Also, if anybody would turn my novels into an animated series, I would love for Rooster Teeth to be able to do that. Hit me up. I hope this book will be published before I graduate uni. As soon as I knew that I wanted to self-publish this book, I had a goal in mind. Before I graduate university, without having to resit any papers, I wanted to have my first book published. Now you know why I made my sim ambitious in my Sims video. It'll be a dream 8 years in the making once it comes out, hopefully a year from now. And I hope you guys will be a part of this journey when my book comes out. Wow, look at me, already starting promos and my book hasn't even been professionally edited. And there you guys have it. Those are 23 facts about my work in progress. If you guys want to know any more facts, you can let me know in the comments below, provided none of them will be spoilers. Apart from that, don't forget to check me out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and my blog so you can follow more of my creative journey. And I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Bye everybody!